Paper bags on heads and sections of empty seats can only mean one thing: an NFL team is terrible. It happens every year, but only a select group of teams can be in the running for the worst NFL team of all time. Owners calling plays instead of coaches, firing a team president in September, players retiring after winless seasons. These are the 5 NFL teams that simply stand out above, or should we say, below the rest. Like the Cleveland Browns, who were already in the cellar of the NFL, but their disastrous 2016 campaign was the start of something even worse. Despite the franchise entering its 75th season in the NFL, they are one of only 4 teams to never appear in a Super Bowl. But in the fall of 2016, Cleveland hit new depths. Under first-year head coach Hugh Jackson, the Browns kinda sucked immediately, losing a franchise record 15 games. So, how does a team get to 1-15? It starts at the top. On January 3rd of 2016, the Browns owner Jimmy Haslam fired previous general manager Ray Farmer and didn't hire a replacement. Instead, they gave those duties to executive VP Sashi Brown, without actually naming him as the GM. Brown had never been a GM before being given the role, and Cleveland was already coming off a terrible 3-13 season in 2015. Before the 2016 season, Jackson had just 1 year of head coaching experience, and placing their bets on quarterback Robert Griffin III only stacked the odds against them. So when Week 1 came around, the Browns opened with a below-average Philadelphia Eagles team. Despite facing a team that gave up 20.7 points per game that season, the Browns could only muster 288 total yards on offense and scored just 1 touchdown. In the 29-10 Week 1 loss, 50% of Robert Griffin III's pass attempts fell incomplete. Considering that in 2015, RG3 had been regulated to third-string quarterback and scout team safety in his final year with Washington, it's not a surprise that he struggled. Still, after multiple critical injuries had sidetracked his career, the Browns were willing to give him a $7.5 million contract, despite the obvious red flags. Now, if ignoring red flags was how teams won Super Bowls, the Browns would look like the New England Patriots. But as the warning signs predicted, RG3 immediately injured his shoulder and headed to the injured reserve. A consistent presence at QB is critical for teams to succeed, and Cleveland was without their number 1 guy after 1 week. So what followed was another 13 weeks of agony in Cleveland. The Browns failed to win a game all the way until December, losing by an average of 13.4 points per game in their first 14 contests. Cleveland was simply terrible for the majority of the season, but the times they did keep the games close was thanks to players like running back Isaiah Crowell and wide receiver Terrell Pryor. Sweet release from the threat of a winless season came in Week 16, when a bad San Diego Chargers team visited the Browns in a game with 0 playoff implications. On the back of 2 rushing TDs from Crowell, the Browns held on to a 2017 win. That win over San Diego prevented the worst-case scenario, but NFL fans know that it only delayed the inevitable until the 2017 season. But we'll get back to that later, because things got so bad for the Colts that the team owner started calling plays, and there is no question that the franchise hit its greatest low in the early 1980s. After a mediocre 7-9 season in 1980, the Colts were looking to improve with a second-year head coach Mike McCormick. And after stealing a 29-28 season-opening road win against the New England Patriots, they were seemingly on the right track, except that quickly proved not to be the case. Baltimore would go on to lose 14 consecutive games on their way to a 2-14 record. The spectacularly terrible way Baltimore made history is still remembered, but few names from the Colts squad have stood the test of time. Let's run down the list of embarrassing accolades. Baltimore set records for the most points allowed, giving up 533 total points, or 33 points per game. The 1981 Colts had the worst point differential in a 16-game season, with -274, and gave up the most touchdowns allowed in a season, with opponents scoring 68 times. And they forced the fewest punt returns in a season, with just 12. Think about that last stat. The Colts forced just 12 punts. That means there were several games in which Baltimore did not force the opposing offense off the the field or put them in a position to punt. And due to a serious amount of disrespect for the Baltimore defense, opponents would also take their chances converting fourth downs instead of handing the ball over. But on November 15, 1981, the Colts' ineptitude hit a different level during a game against the Philadelphia Eagles, because longtime owner of the Colts franchise, Bob Irsay, went into the coach's booth, pulled QB Burt Jones for Greg Landry, and then called plays. If Baltimore wasn't the joke of the 81 season before that point, the team owner pulling control from his staff gave the franchise a clown nose. It was such a bizarre and unprofessional decision that Irsay did immediate damage control after the 38-13 loss to Philadelphia. But his comments just came off as an owner who still didn't know what he was doing. I wish that you would print it that I did not call the shots during the entire second half. I did it just for a minute or two. Then, after the touchdown, I shut up. I was the one who put Landry and Jones in and out. And yes, it was my play for the touchdown. And years later, Burt Jones revealed his side of the story in a Sports Illustrated interview. Irsay couldn't have told you how many players were on the field, never mind what plays we had. All he was trying to do was embarrass the coaches and the players. When he told me to run, I threw. When he told me to throw left, I ran right. Surprisingly, the Colts did win another game after the debacle against the Eagles, and Baltimore actually beat New England for the second time that season, sandwiching a 14-game losing streak with wins against the Patriots. But any good vibes that the Colts salvaged with their second win was quickly forgotten in the next season. Baltimore went winless in 1982, going 0-8-1 due to several games being foregone due to a player strike. Over the 81 and 82 seasons, the Colts' combined record was 2-22-1. And if the 1981 Colts were a clown show, the 1976 Tampa Bay Buccaneers were a full-on circus. NFL fans are excited about the return of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers' retro creamsicle uniforms this season, and for good reason. They look awesome. But when the franchise first debuted in 1976, the fans weren't talking about their eye-catching jerseys. They were screaming about how the team was simply not pro football ready.
Gentlemen, I would hope to hell we could play more aggressive football. I have never seen a team tackle this poorly in football in my whole life.
See, the Bucs called on two legends of college football to lead their team. And on paper, a team led by four-time national championship-winning coach John McKay and legendary Florida QB Steve Spurrier should succeed.
There's John McKay. I think he said he was going to go out and buy an O.J. Simpson poster so he could remember what it was like when he was a good coach.
But the reality is that injuries and dysfunction kneecapped Tampa Bay.
We ended up with 21 guys on injured reserve, 18 knee surgeries. Unprecedented.
To the point that winning games was almost impossible. In the team's opening weeks, that became obvious, because the Buccaneers did not score a touchdown in either of the team's first two NFL games, getting outscored 43-0 in the process. Then, in Week 3, they finally did reach the end zone, but still lost to the Buffalo Bills in a 14-9 contest. Tampa would end up scoring an abysmal 8.9 points per game, getting shut out 5 separate times during their season. On just 3 occasions, the Buccaneers kept their losing margin to just 1 score, and they lost by an average of 20.5 points per game. But even when your team sucks, it's important to laugh, right? That's why throughout the Bucs' 0-14 season, McKay consistently dropped press conference gold as the team suffered setback after setback. One quip came when the Buccaneers were still looking for their first win late in the 76 season.
We've now proven we can't play on the road or in front of our own crowd. We would like to have a neutral site.
Or when he explained his approach to players returning to Tampa Bay after the 76 season. Stop by my office tomorrow and pick up some fake noses and mustaches so no one recognizes your sorry asses. But McKay did do some fortune-telling at the end of the season. We'll be back. Maybe not this century, but we'll be back. Of course, the Buccaneers did come back to play the next season, but it wasn't much better. In 77, the Bucs went 2-12, with both wins coming at the end of the season, meaning they lost an NFL record 26 consecutive games. In 1981, they eventually won a playoff game under McKay. But near the start of the new century, Tampa Bay finally hoisted the Lombardi Trophy after winning Super Bowl 37 in 2003.
Buccaneers win! Buccaneers win in San Diego! go. It took 27 years to get here. It took us 60 minutes to bring home the trophy.
The 1976 Buccaneers could be further up this list, but the team's inaugural season and the plethora of injuries the team suffered saves them from further embarrassment. You see, only 5 roster members played all 14 games, which would be unheard of in the modern NFL. Despite the context, one thing was clear. Tampa Bay Buccaneers team was horrendous, but they had several excuses as a brand new NFL franchise. The same can't be said for the 2017 Cleveland Browns, because after one of the most embarrassing seasons in franchise history, the Cleveland Browns outdid themselves by imploding even further. They basically ended a rookie QB's career before it even began, on their way to a winless season.
We want a team that's going to win. We're sick of losing every year after year.
As we said with the 2016 Browns, they avoided an 0-16 season, but seemingly delayed the inevitable. Welcome to the 2017 Browns. Cleveland stuck with head coach Hugh Jackson as well as GM Sashi Brown. In 2016, it translated to a 1-15 season, so clearly in 2017, it was a recipe for success.
No, I'm not going 1-15. No, I'll be swimming in the lake over there somewhere. So that's not happening.
Cleveland became the second team ever to go 0-16 and did it in painful fashion. Whereas teams like the 76 Buccaneers had few chances to actually win, the Browns lost 6 games by 6 points or less, including a 27-21 overtime loss to the Green Bay Packers in Week 14. That's what separates them from the worst team on our list, but it only added to the brutal season Browns fans had to endure.
Do something now. I want to win now. I'm sick of losing. Okay, I'm too old for this.
And what's crazier is that Cleveland went undefeated in the preseason, but that didn't matter once the regular season rolled around. Cleveland's defense was actually solid, ranking 10th in yards allowed per game. Where the team was truly abysmal was on offense, spearheaded by the disappointing play of rookie quarterback DeShone Kizer. The Browns gave up on the Robert Griffin III project after 1 year, electing to draft Kizer in the second round of the 2017 NFL Draft.
The Cleveland Browns select DeShone Kizer.
The former Notre Dame star won the starting job over Cody Kessler and Kevin Hogan before the season, but his 15 games as a starter is one of the worst stretches in NFL history. In 2017, Kizer only completed 53.6% of his passes, throwing for 2,894 passing yards, 11 touchdowns, and 22 interceptions. It's a major red flag to throw that many picks, but averaging less than 200 passing yards per game shows exactly how bad Kizer was. The Browns QB only surpassed 300-plus passing yards in a game once, and only threw more touchdowns than interceptions twice. Kizer tried to contribute on the ground with 419 rushing yards and 5 TDs, but you actually have to complete passes to be an NFL QB. And in a 16-game season, teams that are close to winning but can't get the job done consistently have a coaching issue. In retrospect, hiring Jackson was a bad decision, but his reputation was fine after his first head coaching job with the Raiders. It was his fateful 2.5 years in Cleveland that ended his chances of ever being an NFL head coach again. And yes, it was 2.5 seasons. Despite going winless in 2017, the Browns brought Jackson back for the 2018 campaign before firing after a 2-5 start.
That's a hard pill to swallow, when you've given it your all and you work extremely hard.
Hey, that's one more win than he managed over his first 2 years in Cleveland. But if decades of playoff misfortune and failed potential weren't enough, the Detroit Lions crafted a team in 2008 that was so incredibly bad that they created a history they'll never be able to escape. As one of the NFL's oldest franchises, the Lions have suffered quite a bit. The franchise has a single playoff win in the Super Bowl era and have never come even close to playing in football's biggest game. But none of their struggles compare to the 2008 season.
We have a group of Lions that's called the Pride. Well, we're going to have to change that because these Lions have no pride.
Third-year head coach Ron Marinelli hadn't done especially well in his first 2 seasons with Detroit, going 10-22. But nothing could have prepared fans for the 2008 campaign. It starts and ends with the Lions' defense. On 11 separate occasions, Detroit allowed 30-plus points and nearly surpassed the 1981 Colts for the most points allowed in a single season. The Lions only kept one opponent to less than 20 points, which was also the closest they came to a win. Detroit took a rare lead over the Minnesota Vikings in Week 5 and was even up 10-9 with just a minute to go. But Minnesota finally broke through the underwhelming Lions defense to kick a field goal with just seconds on the clock remaining. It was clear how demoralizing that loss was for the Lions. For the rest of the 2008 season, Detroit didn't come close to winning a game. Considering that Marinelli was a defensive-minded coach who later went on to be the defensive coordinator for the Dallas Cowboys, Detroit's issues on defense were all the more glaring. But it takes two to make a thing go wrong, and Detroit's offense did its part to match the defense. The Lions had different quarterbacks start during the season, two of which were John Kitna and Dante Culpepper. Culpepper and Kitna were quarterbacks entering their final years in the league, and significantly past their primes. Culpepper was a two-time Pro Bowler with the Vikings in the mid-2000s, while Kitna's gunslinging approach was aging poorly at the end of his career. And then there was Dan Orlovsky. Primarily a practice squad quarterback for his first 3 years with the Lions, he became the backup behind Kitna and eventually got the starting nod after the veteran QB's struggles. Orlovsky's first start was in that 12-10 loss to the Vikings, leading to one of the most infamous plays in NFL history. The former UConn QB unintentionally ran out of the end zone for a safety in the first quarter, giving the Vikings 2 points. And obviously, it was just 2 points that separated the teams at the final whistle. Now working for ESPN, Orlovsky is one of the most recognizable analysts in football, but that play will never be forgotten. Unfortunately for the Lions, the QB can also say he was the best passer Detroit had in 2008, as he was the only QB of the 3 starters to not throw more interceptions than he did touchdowns. The 2017 Browns gave the 2008 Lions a run for their money, but pretty much on record alone. Cleveland was far more competitive, while Detroit never looked like they could contend with the average NFL team. And 15 years later, their legacy as the worst NFL team of all time still stands.